Hello, Symposiast. I'm Dr. Angela Puca, Religious Studies PhD and University Lecturer, and this is your online resource for the academic study of magic, esotericism, paganism, shamanism, and all things occult. I have a very juicy episode for you guys and philosophical. If you're interested in divination, whether it is possible to foresee the future, and if so, can you then change it? And what does this all mean about our free will, the concept of agency, and the concept of time? So, divination is quite a big deal in the Esoteric community. And one of the questions that philosophically arises is it possible to foresee the future? And if so, what does it mean? What does it mean in terms of our reality? What does it mean in terms of our agency, both in terms of foreseeing the future and whether, because I know that when it comes to practitioners, there are some that believe that you can alter the response of a divination. And in fact, it's a kind of a guidance so that you can achieve what you want, even if it is a change compared to what came up in the reading or in whatever divination that you've done. Whereas there are others that think that the outcome that you have foreseen cannot be changed. There are others still that think that there are some types of outcome that can be changed and others that cannot. So others that are a bit more pivotal and essential than others. There's really a wide variety of views on divination. And I thought I would go into a deep dive. So prepare a snack and a drink because this is going to be a long philosophical ride. But we will explore all these conversations around divination, whether, I'm not going to cover whether it is possible or not to foresee the future because it's not really the scope of an academic investigation. But I'm going to cover what does it mean? If it is possible to foresee the future, what does it mean in terms of our reality, our word, our cosmology, our agency for time and space? So I will explore really all these different avenues, and by the end of it, you will probably be more confused. No, hopefully, you will have a broader idea of what all these concepts and ideas and practices mean for us as human beings and our understanding of it all. Just have very low-key expectations. So let's dive into it because, as I said, it's going to be a long philosophical one. So I hope that you have your brains on and your snack in your hand, and let's go. The question of whether the future can be predicted, and if so, whether it can be changed, I'd say sits at the intersection of metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. It is a problem that has preoccupied philosophers, theologians, scientists, and esoteric practitioners alike, precisely because it touches upon some of the most fundamental categories of human thought: time, causality, agency, and freedom. To predict the future is not just to forecast a likely event, it is to claim a form of knowledge that appears to defy the temporal boundary between the present and the not yet. To change a predicted future, in turn, implies that the future is not only knowable but also malleable. This dual possibility raises philosophical tensions that have never been fully resolved. Historically, prediction has been associated with divine knowledge, fate, or the mechanistic unfolding of causal chains. In ancient philosophy, the problem was already well articulated in debates over determinism and freedom. The Stoics, for instance, upheld a cosmological determinism in which all events occur according to divine logos. The implication was that everything that happens, including what we come to know as the future, is fixed within a rational and providential order. Yet, even in Stoicism, a space is carved out for rational assent and inner freedom. What Epictetus would call our prohairesis, the capacity for volition within fate. By contrast, in Christian thought, the problem of prediction has often turned on the apparent conflict between divine omniscience and human free will. If God infallibly knows what will occur, how can human beings act freely? This conundrum reaches one of its most influential formulations in the work of Boethius. who attempts to preserve both divine foreknowledge and human liberty by proposing that God exists in an eternal present, outside time as we understand it. From this eternal vantage, God sees all of history as a simultaneous whole, much like an observer watching all frames of a film at once. In this view, prediction is only possible for a being outside time, suggesting that if humans are capable of prediction, they must in some way be participating in a temporality other than the linear. Modern philosophy, particularly from Kant onwards, further complicates this picture. For Immanuel Kant, time is not something we encounter in the world as it exists in itself, but rather a necessary form of our intuition, one of the pure a priori conditions that structure all possible experience. This means that the future is not out there waiting to be discovered, but rather a function of how human consciousness organizes temporal experience. On this view, prediction might be less about accessing objective facts about future states of affairs and more about anticipating the unfolding of experience according to the categories and forms of sensibility. The implication here is profound. If time is internal to consciousness, then prediction may be ontologically tied to imagination, and the notion of changing the future becomes less about causally redirecting an external world and more about reconfiguring internal anticipations and volitional structures. The rise of probabilistic reasoning and determinism in the scientific revolution introduced a new framework, one in which the future is predictable not because it is foreordained by divine will, but because it is the necessary consequence of prior conditions. Laplace's demon, a hypothetical intelligence that knows all forces and positions of particles, was said to be able to calculate the entire past and future of the universe from present data. Yet, even in this mechanistic model, prediction implies closure. If one can know the future, then the future already exists in some sense, and freedom becomes an illusion. However, the advent of quantum theory in the 20th century challenged this deterministic paradigm. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and the probabilistic nature of quantum mechanics introduced indeterminacy at a foundational level of reality. In this new framework, the future is not fully determined by the past and therefore cannot be known with certainty. But this does not entirely dismiss the possibility of prediction. It merely reframes it in terms of likelihood rather than inevitability. Outside of academic philosophy and science, esoteric traditions have long maintained that certain individuals can access knowledge of the future through non-rational means, what might be called divinatory epistemologies. Techniques such as astrology, tarot, scrying, geomancy, and trance-based vision are employed to penetrate the veil of linear time. In many magical and esoteric systems, time is not seen as strictly sequential, but as layered, symbolic, or fractal. The future is not ahead of us in a straight line, but coexists with the present in a different register of being. Practitioners of divination are thus not so much foreseeing a fixed outcome as glimpsing one of many possible timelines, each branching from the present depending on various energetic, volitional, or cosmic factors. The future becomes a field of potentialities, and divination a way of turning into its resonances. If such a model is valid, or even if it is taken seriously as a symbol, then the act of prediction becomes participatory. To know a possible future is already to begin altering it, consciously or unconsciously. We are no longer in the domain of passive observation, but of active co-creation. This view finds echoes in process philosophy, especially in the thought of Alfred North Whitehead, who argues that reality consists of a flow of actual occasions, each of which synthesizes the past and contributes novelty to the future. Here, prediction is not just the extrapolation of patterns, but a philosophical and perhaps spiritual engagement with the becoming of the world. The philosophical stakes of these questions are immense. If the future can be predicted, must it therefore be fixed? If it can be changed, is the prediction still true? What kind of agency is exercised by a being who sees their fate and then acts to avert it? Is that agency compatible with freedom, or is it already inscribed in the structure of time? Throughout this episode, we will explore how these tensions have been addressed, sometimes resolved, more often deepened by thinkers ranging from Boethius and Kant to Bergson, Whitehead, and Crowley, as well as within lesser known esoteric models of time and magical action. At the core of all these perspectives lies the same persistent enigma. In what kind of universe do we live if we can know what has not yet happened? But before we dive even deeper into the rabbit hole, the philosophical rabbit hole of divination, agency, and causality, I'd like to remind you that this project of delivering free educational content on all topics in esotericism based on peer-reviewed scholarship can only exist thanks to your support. You are all my fancy sponsors, so if you have the means and want to support my work, please do so by joining my Patreon community. We have monthly lectures, a book club. You can also have one-to-one conversations with me. And we have also monthly lectures, a Discord server. So there's really lots of academic fun going on. So I'm sure that you will love it if you join my community. Also, you can support me on Ko-fi, super thank me in the comments. You can send me donations on PayPal. And also, please check out my services at drangelafuca.com. You can also commission a video on a topic that you like, have tutoring sessions with me, and also you can take my courses, and there's a new one coming up. Also, don't forget to sign up for my newsletter so that you stay in contact with me besides social media platforms that we know can change at any moment. And I think it's a good way to stay in contact with me regardless of social media, so that you're also up to date with everything that is going on with me. And every time that there's something new or a new promotion, a new course, a new book, my newsletter subscribers are the second ones to know. First ones are always my patron. So thank you all for considering, because it is really thanks to all of you guys who can afford it that everybody in the world has access to this free educational content. So thank you all who have supported, are supporting, and will support my work. And back to our philosophical exploration now. To understand what it means to predict the future, we must begin by exploring the foundational philosophical theories of time and foreknowledge that have shaped Western thought. Classical philosophy provides the first systematic engagements with the metaphysical status of temporality, the coherence of divine foreknowledge, and the conditions under which human agency may be said to operate freely. Central to this tradition are the models developed by Boethius in late antiquity and by Immanuel Kant in the modern period, both of whom frame time not merely as a chronological phenomenon, but as a structural feature of reality and consciousness, with direct consequences for how we understand prediction, freedom, and change. Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius offers what is arguably the most influential classical account of divine foreknowledge in relation to human freedom. In the Consolation of Philosophy, in Latin Consolatio Philosophiae, composed during his imprisonment before execution, Boethius formulates a metaphysical response to the apparent incompatibility between God's omniscience and the contingency of human actions. The problem he confronts is this: if God knows everything, including future actions, then those actions must necessarily occur as foreknown. But if they must occur, how can they be free? Boethius resolves these by radically altering the temporal framework in which the question is asked. He proposes that God exists outside of time entirely, in a state of eternal presentness. Unlike human beings who perceive time as a succession of moments, past, present, and future, God perceives all time simultaneously, not as a sequence but as a whole. This divine simultaneity totum simul, renders God's knowledge non-temporal. God does not foresee future events, but rather sees all events in one eternal gaze. This model entails that divine foreknowledge does not causally determine events. To use Boethius' own analogy, just as human observation of a person walking does not cause the walking, so God's eternal observation of an action does not cause that action to happen. Human beings remain free because their actions are not coerced by God's knowledge. Rather, God's knowing encompasses these actions timelessly. Boethius' solution is elegant but not unproblematic. Later medieval thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas, John Duns Scotus, and William of Ockham debated its adequacy. Scotus, for example, argued that Boethius' eternal present model still fails to account for how God's timeless knowledge can include truths about contingent future events that could, in principle, be otherwise. Ockham more radically suggested that God knows conditional future contingents by virtue of their conditionality, preserving divine knowledge while allowing true libertarian free will. Nevertheless, Boethius' core insight that the structure of time itself determines what kind of knowledge and freedom are possible remains foundational for later thought. It anticipates the modern philosophical move to investigate not just the contents of time, but the very form of temporal experience. Immanuel Kant reconfigures the question entirely by moving away from theological metaphysics to transcendental philosophy. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant argues that time is not an objective feature of things, as they exist independently of the mind, things in themselves. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant argues that time is not an objective feature of things, as they exist independently of the mind, the things in themselves. But time is a pure form of human sensibility. Time, alongside space, is what he calls an a priori intuition. It is a condition that makes experience possible, not something discovered in the experience itself. And by the way, I refuse to say a priori because I want to use the correct Latin pronunciation. This move has several profound implications. First, the future is not an entity out there waiting to be discovered or known. Instead, the future is constituted by the mind's temporal ordering of experience. We anticipate the future not because we have access to it in an ontological sense, but because our cognition necessarily unfolds temporally. Prediction, then, is not an unveiling of fixed facts, but an imaginative projection structured by reason and habit. Second, Kant's model denies that the human mind has any access to the noumenal realm, things as they are in themselves. We can only ever know the phenomenal world, that which appears to us through the lens of space, time, and the categories of understanding. In this light, divinatory or predictive claims must be treated cautiously. From a Kantian standpoint, such practices may illuminate subjective or symbolic structures, desires, fears, archetypes, but they cannot reveal objective knowledge about a future that by definition does not exist independently of our representation. Yet Kant does not deny human freedom. In fact, he situates freedom in the noumenal realm, where moral law is self-imposed through reason. Though our actions appear causally determined within the phenomenal world, we are morally autonomous as rational agents because we legislate the moral law from beyond experience. Thus, paradoxically, Kant reconciles determinism in appearance with freedom in essence. For the question of prediction and agency, this entails that freedom is not about acting against causal necessity, but about acting according to a self-legislated law that lies beyond empirical causality. If divination plays a role, it may be as a symbolic engagement with the deeper structures of reason or will, but not as a literal glimpse into future phenomena. Between Boethius and Kant, we witness a shift from a metaphysical model of time as something objective and external to a transcendental model, where time is inseparable from the structure of human consciousness. Both thinkers, in their own ways, remove time from the domain of sensory or empirical certainty and relocate it in the domain of intelligibility. For Boethius, time is relative to the divine intellect. For Kant, it is relative to the human one. This opens the door to later philosophical developments, especially in phenomenology and process philosophy, that reconceive temporality as dynamic, lived, and creative. It also helps us understand why so many esoteric traditions describe magical time not in linear terms, but as cyclical, symbolic, or even fractal. The notion that a practitioner of divination might see the future may find no support in Kantian or classical metaphysics as a literal truth, but as phenomenological reality, as a mode of symbolic knowing embedded in human experience. It begins to acquire coherence. As we will explore now, magical and esoteric models of prediction often function not as rival claims to scientific truth, but as alternate ontologies of time, ones that resonate more with the inner duration of consciousness than with external clocks. While classical and modern philosophy have often treated time as either a metaphysical absolute or a cognitive structuring device, esoteric and magical traditions offer radically alternative models. These systems, particularly those developed within the Hermetic, Neoplatonic, Theosophical, and Occultist lineages, tend to reject the rigid linearity of temporal progression. Instead, they conceptualize time as porous, recursive, and symbolically mediated. Within these frameworks, prediction is neither supernatural nor speculative in the conventional sense, but a form of participatory gnosis, a mode of accessing concealed dimensions of reality that remain closed to rational empirical cognition. In what follows, we will examine three major currents within the esoteric treatment of time and prediction. One, the Renaissance Hermetic synthesis of Neoplatonism and astrology. Two, the Theosophical model of multi-level temporality and the Akashic records. And three, modern occult reconfigurations of time as dynamic and pliable, particularly as developed by Austin Osman Spare and Kenneth Grant. These systems should not be taken as homogeneous or always compatible, but rather as diverse attempts to engage philosophically and practically with the idea that the future can be accessed and potentially altered through magical or visionary means. Renaissance esoteric philosophy, particularly in the work of Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, was grounded in a revived Neoplatonism conjoined with Hermetic texts newly translated into Latin. Central to this worldview was the belief that the cosmos was a living, divinely ordered system of interlocking correspondences, the macrocosm and the microcosm, wherein time was not a neutral container, but an expression of divine harmony. Ficino, in his three books on life, De Vita Libri Tres, from 1489, posits that planetary intelligences influence both the soul and the temporal flow of human life. Astrology, therefore, becomes not a superstition but a theurgical science, allowing the magus to align themselves with celestial rhythms and thereby predict and sometimes mitigate their influence. Prediction in this model is not deterministic but participatory. The practitioner reads the signatura rerum, the symbolic signatures through which cosmic patterns manifest in time. Pico, while more skeptical of astrology as a mechanical system, affirms the principle that divine truths can be accessed through divine enthusiasmos, a prophetic inspiration. He locates genuine divinatory insight in the intersection of the human soul with divine intellect, anticipating later models of active imagination and inspired gnosis. In both thinkers, the future is not a closed system of inevitable outcomes, but a field of symbolic possibilities whose patterns can be discerned and worked with through cultivated spiritual perception. Time, in this sense, is musical rather than linear, a series of harmonics that the soul must learn to interpret and internalize. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, theosophists such as Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, Annie Besant, and Leadbeater introduced a new esoteric model of time that combined elements of Hindu cosmology, Western occultism, and Romantic idealism. Central to this system is the concept of the Akashic records, a vast non-physical archive where all events, thoughts, and actions across time are inscribed and eternally preserved. The idea of the Akashic field derives from the Sanskrit word akasha, meaning ether or space. In Hindu metaphysics, it refers to the fifth element, a subtle substratum of reality. Theosophists reinterpreted these as a noetic medium in which the totality of time is encoded, and which can be altered by trained clairvoyance through altered states of consciousness. In this model, the future is not uncreated, but pre-existent in the higher planes of the mental and causal worlds. The clairvoyant or initiate, through meditation or visionary work, may access these pre-formed patterns and discern the most probable lines of future development. Importantly, the Akashic records do not reveal a fixed fate. Theosophy maintains that human beings retain moral and spiritual agency. The future is a realm of probability, not inevitability. What is perceived clairvoyantly is a dominant trajectory, often karmically determined, but this can be altered through conscious evolution or spiritual intervention. This conception of time aligns with certain modern process ontologies in its emphasis on becoming over being, and with Jungian and archetypal models in its suggestion that the future exists in symbolic or imaginal form before manifesting in empirical reality. In the 20th century, occult thinkers such as Austin Osman Spare and Kenneth Grant developed novel models of time that further distance themselves from classical linear temporality. For Spare, time is not an objective sequence but a psychological and magical construct, susceptible to distortion through acts of will and gnosis. In the Book of Pleasure, Spare introduces the concept of atavistic resurgence, where ancestral memories and futures collapse into the present moment via trance and sigillization. Magical techniques allow the practitioner to bypass temporal consciousness and act upon time directly, not by foreseeing, but by collapsing the future into the now. Prediction in Spare's model is less a form of knowledge and more a magical operation. The magician does not passively await the future, but reaches into the latent field of becoming and exerts a formative influence. This anticipates aspects of chaos magic and post-structuralist theory in its emphasis on temporality as a site of performance rather than representation. Kenneth Grant expands this vision in his Typhonian trilogies, particularly outside the circles of time, where he posits that time is a labyrinth of spirals and gates, navigable through ritual and visionary work. Drawing on Lovecraftian mythos, Tantra, and Crowleyan thelema, Grant reconfigures temporality as occult topology. Magical operations open wormholes or nexuses between timelines, allowing the adept to glimpse or even cross into other temporal realities. For Grant, divination is not a form of passive receptivity, but an active manipulation of time-space. It draws on subconscious archetypes and trans-dimensional intelligences, mediated through symbol and myth. The future is thus never predicted in the strict sense. It is contacted, shaped, and re-inflected. What these historic traditions share is a refusal to separate time from meaning. Unlike the abstract, qualifiable time of physics or the a priori intuition of Kantian epistemology, esoteric time is symbolic, recursive, and inhabited. It is a field through which consciousness moves, not just passively, but as a co creative agent. Prediction becomes a form of knowing that is also a form of doing, a magical act that simultaneously reveals and alters the field of potentialities. From Ficino's cosmic harmonics to sparse temporal implosion of sigils, esoteric traditions challenge the view that the future is either fixed or unknowable. Instead, they offer a nuanced and often paradoxical model in which the future is partially accessible, conditionally knowable, and inherently interactive. This understanding radically reframes the philosophical implications of prediction. If time is symbolically structured and consciousness sensitive, then agency may not be about breaking causality, but about navigating symbolic resonances. It is to this issue of agency, change, and freedom in the face of predicted futures that we now turn. As we deepen our philosophical exploration of the future, we must turn to metaphysical theories of time that seek to define its ontological structure. The nature of time, how it exists, whether it flows, and what is real within its passage, has profound implications for whether prediction is possible and whether the future can be changed. So now we will explore three central philosophical models of time: eternalism, presentism, and modal realism, paying close attention to their consequences for knowledge, freedom, and agency. Eternalism is the view that past, present, and future events all equally exist. In other words, time is treated like a dimension of space. Just as all locations in space exist whether or not someone is currently there, so too do all moments in time exist, regardless of whether they are happening now. This block universe model of time is supported by many interpretations of Einstein's theory of relativity, particularly the idea that time is not absolute but relative to the observer's frame of reference. From the perspective of eternalism, the future is not something that will exist, it already exists, just not from the standpoint of the present observer. Therefore, in principle, it can be known. This may lead to a strong form of determinism. The future is already real, and our experience of temporal flow is an illusion generated by our passage through the block. Prediction under this model is not metaphysically problematic. What is problematic is free will. If the future is already actualized, then our choices are not genuinely open, only unknown to us. This concern is echoed in J.M.E. McTaggart's paradox, wherein he famously argues in the unreality of time that our experience of temporal passage is contradictory. He distinguishes between the A series, past, present, future, and the B series, earlier than, later than, concluding that only the B series can be consistent with eternalism, but that it cannot account for real change. If all events are fixed within the B series, then genuine becoming, upon which any idea of change or agency depends, is illusory. In theological context, this model harmonizes with Boethius's notion of divine eternity, which we previously discussed. God sees all of time as a completed whole, but if humans exist within the block, are their decisions truly theirs? This is the central metaphysical challenge that eternalism poses to agency. If a prediction is accurate in an eternalist universe, it is not just a possible future, it is an actual one, and thus cannot be changed. Presentism, by contrast, maintains that only the present moment is ontologically real. The past has ceased to exist. The future does not yet exist. On this view, statements about the future have no truth value because there is no thing in reality that corresponds to them. Consequently, prediction becomes philosophically problematic. How can one know something that does not yet exist? Presentism has intuitive appeal, aligning with everyday phenomenology and with ethical theories that privilege present choices. It supports libertarian accounts of free will. If the future is not fixed, then agents can genuinely bring about new realities through their choices. However, presentism faces severe challenges, both metaphysically and physically. In the context of relativity theory, simultaneity is relative. What counts as present in one frame of reference may be past or future in another. This undermines the notion of a universal present, and with it, the coherence of presentism on a cosmological scale. More crucially, for our purposes, presentism makes prediction epistemologically opaque. Divination, precognition, and prophetic vision all imply the existence of some determinable structure in the future. If the future does not exist at all, then what are such predictions about? The presentist must claim either that divination is mere speculation or that the future exists in some non actual yet conceivable form, pushing them closer to a modal realist position. So let's see what that is. Modal realism, especially in the formulation of David Lewis, offers a third path. Lewis argues that possible words are just as real as the actual word, differing only in their indexal relation to the observer. In this framework, all potential futures exist. The world we inhabit is just one among many branching actualities. Although Lewis does not primarily concern himself with time travel or prediction, his framework has been adapted by metaphysicians and philosophers of time to theorize about the nature of possible futures. A related approach is the branching time model, developed in philosophical logic and temporal semantics. Here, the future is conceived as a tree of possible branches emanating from the present. At each moment, multiple futures are available, and choices actualize one path over others. This resonates with magical and esoteric notions of multiple timelines, especially in chaos magic and modern occult metaphysics, where the practitioner aims to navigate or collapse certain potentialities. In these modal frameworks, prediction becomes a probabilistic or heuristic activity, mapping likely trajectories among a space of possible words. This model aligns with the esoteric idea of divination as glimpsing a likely future, a future that exists as a coherent potential within a broader field of becoming, not as an already actualized destiny. From the standpoint of agency, modal realism offers perhaps the most fertile philosophical ground. The future is not determined, nor is it non existent. It is plural, a web of diverging and converging paths. Agency, then, is the capability to influence which among many real futures becomes actualized. The act of prediction may serve not merely to describe the path, but to choose it. Each of these models offers a distinctive framework for understanding what a prediction is and what it means to change the future. In eternalism, prediction is possible, but freedom is questionable. Any attempt to change the future is already part of a fixed timeline. In presentism, freedom is strong, but prediction lacks ontological grounding. In modal realism, prediction is intelligible as a heuristic of branching possibilities, and freedom is exercised through the selection of one branch over another. Esoteric traditions often intuitively align with modal or branching models, portraying the future not as a single inevitable event, but as a landscape of potentialities that the wheel, ritual, and symbol can influence. These models make room for conditional prophecy, the kind found in magical systems where visions of the future are not fixed destinies but warnings or invitations, calls to action rather than pronouncements of fate. Thus, the metaphysical model of time we adopt determines not only what we think the future is, but whether we can know it, and if knowing it allows us to act meaningfully. We now turn to the heart of this tension. Can a predicted future be changed? And if so, what kind of agency does this presuppose? The possibility of predicting the future raises a fundamental philosophical tension. If we know what is going to happen, is it still possible to change it? And if we can change it, was it ever truly known? At stake here is not simply a metaphysical question about time, but a profound inquiry into the nature of agency, freedom, and the epistemic status of prophecy, divination, and foresight. So, we will now interrogate how different philosophical and esoteric frameworks understand the compatibility or incompatibility between foreknowledge and free will. We will explore the nature of agency in a predictive context, the logic of conditional prophecy, and also the metaphysical implications of magical interventions that claim to alter the future. The conflict between prediction and agency has a long pedigree in Western philosophy, most famously addressed in medieval problems of divine foreknowledge. If God knows in advance that a person will perform a specific act, then it seems that the person cannot do otherwise. And if they cannot do otherwise, how can their action be free? This problem, often illustrated through the Oedipus myth and later through theological debates on predestination, reveals the essential paradox. A future event cannot be both known and undetermined. Boethius, as discussed earlier, attempted to resolve this by placing divine knowledge outside time, thereby preserving the contingency of human acts. However, critics have long argued that this does not dissolve the core problem, it merely relocates it. If the truth of the future event is known eternally, then from the standpoint of that eternal knowledge, the event must be necessary. The early modern philosopher Luis de Molina offered a more flexible model through his theory of middle knowledge, scientia media, wherein God knows what free creatures would do in any possible circumstance. This allows for a kind of predictive omniscience without causal determinism, since God's foreknowledge is based on the agent's freely chosen actions in hypothetical situations. While this was developed within a theological context, its structure anticipates later philosophical models that integrate freedom with branching futures. Contemporary logic has also engaged this question, particularly in temporal modal logic. Contemporary logic has also engaged this question, particularly in temporal modal logic, which allows for the evaluation of propositions about future contingents. The idea of conditional prophecy, a hallmark of divine practices, is given formal shape in these systems. A conditional prophecy is not a fixed statement like X will happen, but one that depends on a trajectory. If current trends continue, X will happen. Such predictions do not negate agency but invite intervention. Philosopher Nicholas Rescher, in Prediction and the Human Condition, argues that in systems involving reflexive agents, those who can respond to predictions, the act of prediction alters the outcome. He distinguishes between prophetic and conditional predictions. The former claims inevitability, while the latter implies the possibility of deviation. Importantly, in human affairs, all predictions are potentially self defeating, especially when they lead agents to act against the predicted outcome. This is known as the prediction paradox, a prediction that causes itself to become false. Such self defeating prophecies challenge traditional causal models and imply a non linear relationship between knowledge and action. This aligns with esoteric worldviews in which knowledge of a future outcome is not passive information, but an energetic or magical event. This aligns with esoteric worldviews in which knowledge of a future outcome is not passive information, but an energetic or magical event, and one that opens a space for redirection. Within occult and esoteric frameworks, the concept of will is elevated to a metaphysical principle. Particularly in Western esotericism, from the Hermetic tradition through to Aleister Crowley and beyond, the will is not simply psychological, but ontologically creative. It is the capacity to intervene in the field of becoming, to shape reality according to spiritual insight and magical technique. Aleister Crowley's doctrine of true will, most famously expressed in the Book of the Law as "do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," presents a model of agency in which the soul possesses a unique telos, a destiny that unfolds not through passive acquiescence, but through active alignment. In this system, the future is neither entirely open nor fixed. It is structured by the soul's hidden trajectory. Divination serves as a tool to detect the current alignment or misalignment with the true will. Prediction is thus not an imposition of fate, but a revelation of the energetic currents shaping one's becoming. Dion Fortune, in Psychic Self-Defense, articulates a similar view. She describes magical interventions as methods of deflecting probable outcomes through mental discipline and ritual. Fortune asserts that psychic attacks and dangers can be foreseen and averted if the magician acts in time to redirect their trajectory. This implies a model of time in which probable futures exist as energetic configurations, susceptible to will, ritual, and spiritual force. Both Crowley and Fortune treat agency as neither absolute nor illusory, but conditional. Both Crowley and Fortune treat agency as neither absolute nor illusory, but conditional. The magician does not create ex nihilo, but works within an existing web of causality, seeking to bend or reconfigure its flow. Agency here is both ethical and ontological. It requires discernment of which futures are possible, desirable, and in harmony with the will's deeper nature. In modern continental philosophy, especially in the phenomenological and process traditions, agency is reframed not as a capacity to choose between pre existing options, but as a mode of creative emergence within time. Henry Bergson, in Time and Free Will, contrasts the quantitative, specialized time of science with durée réelle, the qualitative, lived time of consciousness. Freedom for Bergson is not located in arbitrary decision, but in the deep coherence of the self's internal duration. When we act freely, we are not breaking with causality, but expressing the unique rhythm of our becoming. Likewise, Alfred North Whitehead, in Process and Reality, conceives of time as a sequence of actual occasions, each of which is a self creative event. Each moment involves a process of concrescence, where past is synthesized, possibilities are entertained, and a novel decision is actualized. Here, prediction is not about determining outcomes, but navigating fields of potentiality. Agency is the process by which novelty enters the world. Free will, therefore, is not a rupture in causality, but a creative participation in it. Such models resonate with esoteric views that see magic and divination not as violations of causality, but as practices of attunement and co creation. The future in these frameworks is a realm of becoming, and the self is both subject to and sharper of its flow. Finally, we must consider the ethical implications of acting on predictions. If one receives a vision of disaster, does one bear moral responsibility to attempt to avert it? Is knowledge of a future event a burden, a gift, or a temptation? Esoteric traditions often treat divination as a spiritual practice whose efficacy depends on the purity of intent. In many magical systems, particularly within the Hermetic and Kabbalistic lineages, the practitioner is warned against using predictive power for manipulation or control. The ethical magician does not impose their will arbitrarily, but seeks to align with a deeper cosmic order, what Hermeticists call the will of the all. This ethical framework reframes agency not as domination over time, but as responsible co-authorship. To predict is to participate, and to change the future is to accept the weight of intervention. One becomes a steward, not a master of potentiality. The question of whether a predicted future can be changed forces us to reconsider the nature of agency itself. Under deterministic models, prediction seems to negate freedom. Under open models, it seems to imply risk and responsibility. The most compelling philosophical and esoteric accounts, however, suggest a middle path. The future is not fixed, but neither is it formless. It is a structured field of potential shaped by will, perception, and participation. Freedom, in this view, is not the power to do anything, but the power to act meaningfully within the constraints of time, symbol, and causality. Prediction is not antithetical to agency, it is its test. To foresee a future and to act nonetheless is the task of the philosopher and the magician alike. So, throughout this episode, we have traversed multiple philosophical and esoteric landscapes, and we have confronted the perennial tension between the knowability of the future and the reality of freedom. From Boethius' timeless divine vision to Kant's transcendental idealism, from the block universe of eternalism to the branching pathways of modal realism, and from divinatory gnosis of Hermetic astrologers to the ritual interventions of modern occultists, the question remains. If the future can be predicted, what does it mean to change it? And what kind of ethical responsibility does such knowledge confer? Let me know in the comments what you think. And also, if you think that the future can be predicted and whether it can be changed, and what does it mean to your perception of agency, causality, and free will, because I really want to know that. So at the core of our inquiry in this episode lies the ancient conflict between fate and freedom. In Greco-Roman antiquity, the concept of heimarmene, a kind of cosmic necessity, was often seen as inescapable. The Stoics embraced this fate but argued for inner freedom, the ability to consent to necessity as a rational being. The Gnostics, by contrast, sought to escape fate through gnosis, viewing the archontic order of time as a prison from which awakened souls must liberate themselves. These opposing approaches already imply divergent ontologies of time. Is fate something to be accepted or something to be overcome through knowledge? Medieval Christian philosophy, particularly in Boethius' formulation, attempted to preserve divine omniscience while defending human freedom by removing divine knowledge from temporal causality. Yet, as we have seen, this raises new metaphysical complications. Can a future that is known infallibly truly be altered? Modern physics, with its deterministic classical mechanics and indeterministic quantum models, has only deepened this tension. The discovery of quantum indeterminacy in the early 20th century introduced a new metaphysical openness to the future, suggesting that at the fundamental level, the future is not fully determined by the past. However, this openness has not been uncontroversial. Debates between determinist interpretations, such as the Bohmian mechanics, and indeterminist ones, such as the Copenhagen interpretation of many worlds theory, continue to shape how physicists and philosophers think about time and causality. Against this backdrop, the esoteric and magical traditions offer a different and often under-theorized contribution. In these systems, the future is not a fixed point or an unfolding chain of necessity, but a field of possibilities, energetic configurations, or archetypal patterns that can be discerned, influenced, and reconfigured. Divination is thus not merely the passive reception of what will happen, but a practice of engaged interpretation. As anthropologist Susan Greenwood argues, magical consciousness functions through a symbolic logic in which events are connected by meaning rather than cause. A tarot reading, for instance, does not predict in the deterministic sense, but reveals the symbolic constellation of forces influencing the present, which may project into a probable future. To act on such knowledge is to enter the ethical dimension of prediction. Whether one receives a prophetic vision, an astrological indication, or an intuitive knowing, one faces a choice: act to fulfill, avert, or ignore the insight. In religious traditions, prophets are often burdened by the knowledge of what is to come. Jonah flees from the call to warn Nineveh. Cassandra is cursed to know the truth and never be believed. In esoteric contexts, such as the Theosophical and Hermetic traditions, foresight is granted not as power but as responsibility, a call to stewardship over one's own timeline and potentially that of others. The ethical implications of predictive knowledge are therefore profound. If the future is knowable, then inaction becomes complicity. To foresee disaster and not act is to permit it. But if the future is only probable, then action becomes a gamble. One must weigh symbolic insight, personal will, and contextual consequence. Here, the esotericist stands not as prophet or scientist, but as a navigator of ambiguity, drawing upon myth, symbol, and ritual to interpret signs and co create outcomes. This position aligns closely with the phenomenological and process oriented philosophies we have explored. In Whitehead's metaphysics, each actual occasion is a site of decision, a co-crescence of past influences and creative novelty. Similarly, Bergson's durée implies that genuine agency emerges not from abstraction, but from the depth of lived time. These models suggest that freedom is not a metaphysical exception to causality, but an immanent capacity to reconfigure patterns, to bring new forms into being through attention and intention. Such reconfiguration, when understood through magical and esoteric practice, is not accomplished through sheer willpower alone. It requires attunement, the cultivation of sensitivity to subtle patterns, archetypes, and spiritual laws. In systems such as Kabbalah, astrology, or chaos magic, the practitioner's role is not to dominate time, but to weave with it, to find the kairotic moment, the opportune convergence of forces, and act therein. Prediction in this sense is not epistemic certainty, but oracular orientation, a pointing towards that invites ethical discernment. There is therefore a paradox at the heart of all divination and temporal philosophy. The more one seeks to predict the future, the more one is forced to confront the limits of knowledge and the burden of action. To know is to be implicated, to act is to be responsible, and to believe that the future can be changed is to affirm, whether philosophically or magically, a vision of the cosmos in which freedom and structure, necessity and novelty are dynamically entangled. This entanglement does not offer easy answers. It demands from us a higher form of philosophical maturity, one that refuses both fatalism and naive voluntarism. In the end, to predict the future is not merely to ask what will happen, but to ask what can I become given what I know now. This is it for today's video, and I want to give, as a final note, a shout out to my friend Cipriano Maiulo, who's very into this topic, and to Mariangela Aggio, who's a great teacher of the Tarot Divination system. And I'd like to ask you guys, what do you think about all this exploration, and what are your views on divination, time, causality, and your agency within all that? Let me know in the comment, because I'm super, super curious. And if you watched up until this point, I want you to leave me a crystal ball emoji, because we're talking about divination. So I don't think there are tarot cards emojis. So we will have to go for the crystal ball emoji, as a cliche and and a bit I don't know, stereotypical that is. And if you like my content, I would massively appreciate it if you consider supporting my work on Patreon, PayPal, Coffee, YouTube memberships. You can super thank me in the comments. You can check out my services at drangelapuca.com. And I honestly deeply appreciate all of your help. You find all the links in bio, the info box, description, pinned comment, everywhere. So if you want to help out this project and keep it alive, you will know how to find all the ways. So thank you so much for considering. And if you like this video, obviously don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and activate the notification bell so that you will always be notified when I upload a new video. and when I'm live, because my videos might not be shown in the feeds. YouTube just decides arbitrarily when to do so. So if you activate the notification bell, you will always know when I upload a new video. And share my videos around, this one and anyone you love, so that the symposium can grow. And I thank you so very much for being here and being part of my symposium. I really hope that you stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now.
Today we hold the ground, we'll never disappear. We're process and the things, but we will